Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Sri Damodar Janani, Lord Damodar's mother, by Shivram Swami. We are reading from chapter 11 at the moment. Nanda Maharaj releases Krishna. Mukam karati vacharam, pangum langhate girim. Yat kripa tamham vande Shri Gurum Tinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. So yesterday we have been reading that how the Brajvasis have been looking for Krishna and their children, the other Gopas everywhere, and they have come where Krishna has been doing more leelas with the Gopas children, and how everybody is wondering that how the trees have fallen and where are Krishna and his friends. So let's read from there onwards. And why, meanwhile, Nand Maharaj's soldiers studied the marks leading to the trees and agreed among themselves on what they saw. From the drag marks on the ground and the scratch marks on the tree trunks, it appears that the mortar was the cause of this incident. Word spread quickly among the tightly packed audience. It was the mortar. It toppled the trees. Yes. But how? Look at that child. He's tugging on the rope and can hardly budge the mortar. The Brajvasis remained perplexed. They too agreed on the signs that implicated the mortar, but then here was this little boy who, although tied to the mortar, could neither become free from it nor do any more than inch it along. How could a toddler have broken two trees with trunks 2 cubits wide? It is not possible. But then it must have been a ferocious Daitya demon, another Asura who had come to harm Krishna like Trinavrat. These children would not be so peaceful had they seen a demon. Then who was it? The men continued to question each other. As they did, the evidence continued to mount towards Krishna as the cause of the fallen trees. But because the Brajvasis loved Krishna in the way that adults love a small child, as protector and maintainers, they could not accept the logical consequence of their own reasoning. When the cowherd men were thus struggling with their confusion, the women expressed their own heartfelt concern. What a calamity! Krishna could have been crushed and killed, and yet he stands there peacefully, looking as fresh as a newly formed cloud. It is our fortune that nothing happened to him. No doubt Lord Narayan has protected him once again. Taking advantage of the men's deliberations, the ladies made their way to Krishna and began to fondle and caress him, assuring themselves that he was truly free of injury, and the boys' mothers did the same to their sons. Watching their wives tend to the boy, some of the men voiced an additional concern. Although we moved to Gokul to escape Keshi, we have been beset with other demons here. Think of Putana, Trina and Shakata. And now this mysteriously inauspicious event. O King, we should consider relocating to a place that is safer for Krishna and for our children. Other men shared this sentiment, and that sentiment was the seed of a later discussion that would result in the Brajvasis relocating to Vrindavan. Forest. However, Nand Maharaj was more concerned with the present and the quandary at hand. He pondered how were two powerful trees snapped at their bases like twigs. If there were still unknown dangers lurking nearby, the Gopas could neither resume their duties nor let their children roam carefree. The king's younger brother and counselor Nandana placed his arm on Nanda's shoulder. O king, since these children have been with Krishna all along, we should ask them what they know about this incident. The Vrajvasis looked at the children, who then became very self-conscious and apprehensive. Being put on the spot, they looked at each other to see who would speak up. They whispered to each other, "You speak, no you, no you." Like the adults, the boys were also bewildered. But unlike the adults, the boys were not bewildered by the mystery of who felled the trees, but by the sweetness of Damodara, while the Brajvasis were scratching their heads to understand what had happened. The boys knew it was Krishna, and the fact that their peer and for some their junior could do such a remarkable thing and then be worshipped by demigods meant that he was the specialist boy in Gokul. Deciding on the united voice as the best option, the boys shared a secret signal and then spoke in unison. It was Krishna, he did it. Love for Krishna caused the boys to erupt with excitement at his specialness. They could not even complete their sentence when mother left him. Then Krishna began to play with the mortar, which he eventually dragged here. Pointing to a group of flat boulders, they continued, "We were playing there when Krishna crawled between the trees." Taking heart, the boys began to speak individually, competing among each other with newer details as the Vrajvasis listened aghast. The mortar turned sideways and it was talking to the rope. The Vrajvasis nodded disbelievingly. Then as Krishna kept crawling, the mortar got stuck between the trees and he could go no further. That is when Krishna began to tug on the rope. First of all, the birds flew out of the trees, then the trees bent over. One boy leapt forward and then, with both hands outstretched, blurted. Then Krishna tugged and the trees snapped with a pow. The boys were now at a fever pitch and they all imitated the sound or described it in their own way. It was like a boom, 1,000 lightning bolts together, crack, the thundering of 1,000,000 running cows, and the earth shook. The men looked at each other as if to say, "If we are going to believe in talking ropes and mortars, then we could just as well believe that infants topple trees." The boys saw the incredulity of the adults and reasserted what they had said. "It is true. We saw Krishna do it with our own eyes, and that is not all." The men looked even more disbelieving, and one snidely said, "The mortar then danced." Some of the other men chuckled, but the boys were adamant. No, the mortar only rolled around. Then two beautiful men came out of the trees. Yes, amazing people like Devas, beautiful. Now the Vrajvasis took interest. Maybe these men were the culprits they were looking for, and the boys were just explaining events in their own way. "Where did these men come from? Describe them to us, and what did they do?" The boys narrated what they had seen, but the story did not make sense to the Brajvasis. They believed in spirits living in the trees. After all, most of the surrounding villages had worshipped the twin Arjunas, but it would be more likely the spirits burst from the trees, felling them, and not that Krishna had broken the trees and freed the spirits. And why would such beings pray to Krishna anyway? Where did those spirits go? They looked around with concern. Pointing northward, the boy shouted. They went up into the sky. Then Sri Dama forcefully added, "We saw these things with our own eyes." Yes, we did. While the adults would not believe in talking ropes of Krishna's towering trees, they found the report of two superhuman beings emerging from the trees plausible. At least it was an answer, something they did not have. Krishna was angry at his mother, but that was his childish nature domineering his godhood. Yet the Lord's pastime potency was not forgetful of Krishna's divine will, of the order he had given her that morning, and so Yogmaya arranged events accordingly. So far, broadcasting Mother Yashoda's majesty in loving devotion had been the theme of the day, and while Nanda Maharaj was not her equal, he was a close second, himself with no equal. Until the completion of this pastime, Yogmaya would now orchestrate things in a way that a hidden purpose of Sri Damodar was realized, to make known the greatness of his father. After his friends had disclosed the truth of events, Krishna was slightly concerned that the cowherd men may give thought to his superhuman powers and show reverence towards him. I do not want their spontaneous love checked in any way. To offset such a possibility, Krishna applied all his talents to childish play, tugging at the mortar, making grunting sounds, and showing the irritation at not being able to easily move it. There was, however, little cause for Krishna's concern. Nanda Maharaj and his subjects were so overwhelmed with affection for Krishna and their hearts could not admit to the slightest possibility that this playful child could topple trees. Looking at each other, the Vrajvasis simply smiled as if to say, what fertile imaginations these boys have, what stories will they not make up to exalt their friend? But not everyone thought this way. Some of Nanda Maharaj's Brahmana priests could not help but recall Garga Muni's revelation that Krishna would be equal to Narayan in his qualities. Moreover, they had been witness to the death of demons like Pudana, events in which Krishna had always played the leading role. They were not convinced that the boys were spinning tales. Exchanging hidden glances, these Brahmanas thought, since this boy was prophesied to be like Narayan, it is possible that he could have broken the trees, and it is possible that demigods had worshipped him. The notion, although momentary, was a result of the Brahmanas' weaker love for Krishna because of their vast knowledge of Vedic literature. Their attachment lacked the spontaneity of the Gopas and Gopis. It was hard for them not to see Krishna in the light of scriptural revelations describing the incarnations of the Lord. But when the Brahmanas saw Krishna playing, appearing to be no different than the other children, they admitted that such a helpless child could not be God. Still, their intuition and their sensory perception remained at odds with each other. Thus, confusion and doubt prevailed in their minds, and evidence of that was visible on their faces. But the company of the Vrajvasis was overwhelmingly contagious. The natural show of affection for Krishna, their words, gestures, and smiles fanned the Brahmana's own love for Damodara. When other liquids mix with it, the ocean's salty taste does not become less salty. To the contrary, some authorities say its salinity increases. Similarly, the liquid of reverence for Krishna's powers did not diminish the Brahmana's ocean of affection, but instead miraculously enhanced it. With this new wealth of love, the Brahmanas also gave up any idea of doubting Krishna or his friends. They too were happy to languish in the small movements and childish prattle. Nanda Maharaj moved closer to his son. This was his first entrance onto the stage of Damodara Hill, Leela. He had heard the village women call his son Damodara, and now he was seeing his belly-tight son for himself, and he realized the sight as only one with peerless fraternal love could, in the way that Mother Yashoda was the emblem of maternal loving devotion. Nanda Maharaj was its paternal counterpart. In parental love of God, only his good wife surpassed him, and even then her supremacy was marginal. The king's first concern was for Krishna's well-being. Seeing the boys playing with his new toy, the mortar, Nanda Maharaj inferred that Krishna was unhurt. Affectionately running his hands over Krishna's every limb, Nanda Maharaj confirmed that his son was unscathed. Then Krishna managed to pull the mortar a short distance. The king proudly exclaimed, "How strong you are!" Nanda Maharaj's chest swelled with pride at his extraordinary son. Here was his greatest treasure, born of his own seed, the source of his endless delight. His love for Krishna ablaze, Nanda reflected on how his beloved was placed in such a dangerous situation. He thought, how surprising that my queen could have bound her beloved child and then left him alone without thinking of the dangerous consequences. Binding Krishna was an act of cruelty, and abandoning him one of negligence. It was unprecedented punishment for a small offense. Certainly my queen did not give this act careful consideration. Although he thought in this way, the king had no doubt about the extent of his wife's love for her son. More than anyone else, he understood and revered Mother Yashoda as the perfect mother. Yet in the parenting, she was the stricter, sometimes hot-tempered one, while he was the permissive, doting father. When Yashoda chastised Krishna, the boy would take shelter in his father's lap, where refuge never failed him. Nanda Maharaj recognized the exchange of love that underrode that day's events and which had brought Krishna to his predicament. His heart softened and he smiled at his noticeably reserved son. Perhaps he fears further chastisement. The king smiled broadly to encourage his son, his lips moistened by tears of love. Nanda Maharaj's smile was as much to encourage his frightened boy as it was to reassure his anxious wife. who closely followed the proceedings from a distance, repeatedly scanning Krishna's soft limb for a bruise. Nanda exchanged joking glances with his son. Dear boy, your mother, whose lap you always prefer to mine, has bound you for an insignificant offense. How can I excuse you from the discipline imposed by her higher jurisdiction? Krishna had indeed been fearful of how his father would react. His mother may have complained about the rampage through the storeroom, and the villagers could be upset at the loss of their worshipable trees. But Nandaraja's reassuring countenance eased his mind, and he smiled in return. Krishna's smile was wide, revealing 2 rows of small pearl-like teeth, sparkling white against ruby-red lips. It was a thankful smile, a reassuring smile. Krishna was thankful that his father was not upset, and he was reassuring the king of his well-being. I am well and unharmed. Krishna's smile also parried his father's humor. O king, in this land you are the ultimate shelter. When I have been rejected by my mother, to whom else can I turn? Nanda's smile broadened to its limits. He thought, you would bind and liberate all living entities with your own Maya. Are now bound yourself, and still you manage to fetter your own parents with ropes of your love, ropes from which we never seek liberation. Casting a mildly reproaching glance at his wife, Nand Maharaj leaned over the mortar to untie his son. When he looked back at her second time, as if to ask, may I, except for Mother Yashoda, no yogi, Gyani or Bhakta, however competent, had authority to bind the Supreme Lord to a mortar. And only one who was her equal, Nand Maharaj, was qualified to free Krishna from Yashoda's fetters, and even then only with her permission. Mother Yashoda replied with a faint but anxious smile, yes. With this empowerment, Nand Maharaj first untied the rope binding the mortar, then he turned to Krishna and untied the rope from Krishna's waist, repeatedly chanting Govinda Damodara Madhav, Govinda Damodara Madhav. With Krishna free, Nand Maharaj embraced him, smelled his head, and covered his cheeks with kisses. As the rope that bound Krishna's belly fell to the ground, it manifested to its full length, which was the aggregate of all the churning ropes and cow ropes in Gokula. But the great king of Gopas was too absorbed in the ecstasy of loving his son to notice, and even if he had, he would have simply shrugged off the marvel as another one of those mystical events that followed his little son. And this brings us to the end of chapter 11. Nanda Maharaj releases Krishna. So it's been absolute pleasure to read this 11th chapter with you. We look forward to begin the last chapter of this book, chapter 12. Everything ends in transcendental bliss, which is based on the 10th canto, 11th chapter, 7th verse. Thank you for joining. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.